Okay, hello everybody. My name is Makoto Nishibe. I'm the moderator of this session. I would like to start the session, but I'm still waiting for everybody coming. As usual, we are getting late for maybe 5 minutes. Now it's 34. I want to wait for another minute. Yes.
Alves just asked for like 2 more minutes.
Okay. Okay. As far as I can see, this session is for assessment and bibliographical assessment and literature and a proposal. The first speaker is Ferreira.
Yes.
Yes. On IJCCR Publication, Literature Review 2009 to 2015. So it includes a lot of publications. So you need to have more time. Oh, okay, this much.
Yeah, more or less this.
So I suggest he can spend 25 minutes at most, but I told him to try to finish it within 20 minutes. But 5 minutes for questions and comments, at least. And we're gonna have a closing session starting at 6 p.m. here, so we have to finish before the 6 p.m. That's the constraint. So, okay. Oh, Stefan, yeah, okay. So, let's start. Yes, please come. Okay.
Yeah?
So, let's start, please.
Okay. Let me just see if it's okay. It's perfect. Yes. Yeah, so it's counting. Okay, perfect. Good afternoon. Welcome. Last day, last session. My name is Philip. I come from Lisbon. I'm a PhD candidate. I'm an economist. My PhD is all about reconciling money with sustainability. I'm an ecological economist. But today what I bring you here is basically the literature review of basically all scientific peer-reviewed articles published in the IJCCR from 2009 to 2016. Actually, most of the people present in this conference wrote, so I've kind of been with a lot of you in my bedside, like in my desk for the past few months. It's been a very interesting literature review. So basically, 78 scientific articles, volumes 13 to 20. I didn't consider book reviews or editorial notes because they have a completely different structure and scope, etc. And basically the idea was really just to get this kind of macro, holistic perspective on how is the field, how is the science, where are we not going, what are the biases, what are the patterns of the research that we've been doing. And basically I tried to condensate this beautiful. It's all recycled paper, so no worries. I've tried to condensate all this knowledge. I'm going to try to bring it to you. And I divided it into these 4 dimensions. So I've analyzed the structure of the papers, the kind of number of authors, the gender, the affiliation, stuff like this. I've looked into the methodologies that they've used, like, prospective, retrospective. It was like theoretical, empirical, these kind of things. And then I tried to weave the conclusions of all of you to see if there is a meta-narrative coming from your conclusions. And finally, trying to cluster research gaps and research needs. This was basically the invitation. Now, as probably you know, the publications of this journal are quite random. So you can see they're very dependent on the conferences and on the special editions. Now you might ask why 2009 was the cutoff point. Well, it was not because of the symbolism of being after the financial crisis. It's basically there's a big transformation after 2009, both in the structure, in the scientific content and the rigor of the papers, but also is when the conferences come and the special editions come. So it made sense to me to have a cutoff point in 2009. I'll try to make this a little bit participatory, just to see if your gut feelings are right or wrong. So I might ask you, is the IJCCR journal a balanced journal? Yes or no? Main author. Is it gender balanced or no? What do you think? Georgina is doing this. You don't think so? Yes? Well, no. Actually, not completely. Yeah.
There is no journal.
Yes.
Gender balanced.
There is no journal. I know. I'm just putting it out there. So only main authors, we see there's basically main. However, this is good. The author with most publications is actually a woman. The most referenced author of all is also Dr. Jill Stephan, probably all of you know, the University of East Anglia, followed by Bernard Litter and Peter North. They are the three most common referenced authors. And the scientific editor, of course, Georgina. Now, if I ask you, is this journal majority single author or co-authorship is really the majority? What do you think? Single author or a lot of authors partnering together? Gut feeling. Co-authors. It's a little bit disappointing, isn't it? I would say. Actually, as you can see, almost 75% of the scientific articles actually have one single author. This was a surprise for me. I thought, in this field, people would collaborate and da-da-da. Not happening. The reasons why we can discuss later on. Nationality of the main author. As you can see, there are like 5 countries that completely dominate. USA, Germany, UK, Japan, France, followed by Canada, Argentina. So as you can expect, in terms of north-south hemisphere, it's pretty obvious. And also you can see European authors dominate. They have at least half of the authors. So you can see there's a little bit of a bias, of course, in also the structure of the papers. Probably nothing of this is new to you, like your gut feelings will tell you this. Academic background of the main author. I actually thought, as an economist, that I'm not most of the times alone. There are no economists doing this. It's not true, actually. It's interesting. And I explored the academic background of authors, and you can see there's actually quite a lot of economists writing for this paper. Interestingly enough, as you can see, almost nobody from finance, almost nobody from law, which is actually, I think it's one of the reasons why there's a bit, I will show, there's a big, there's a big gap regarding more papers on the legal compliance. Some people from management, and those a big percentage of other is basically either completely people who come from economics, but then they go to geography, so it's hard to trace back, or people from geography, anthropology, etc. But economics is there. Regarding affiliation, most are from universities. So it's interesting to see also that research centers not connected to universities, almost none. Not so many NGOs, central banks, one person, and like private banks that nobody submitted. So you can see there's a clear domination by universities. Just an interesting fact for you. A little bit harder to read, but basically just another information. Average number of pages per publication is 10, and actually the average deviation is almost nothing, so you can take this number. The number of references fluctuate, and what is interesting is actually, and this follows, of course, the 2 conferences, the conference of 2011, especially in 2012, that actually the IJCCR publications, which actually self-reference IJCCR publications, it increased. In the first 4 years, it was about 5.8, and then actually it increased to 16.6. So there's a kind of more people are actually referencing own journal publications, which I think it's a good sign of success, I would say at least. As for the methods used, nature of the research, probably I think you'd assume this, there's a lot of empirical based research, like case studies, they're there, whatever. Not so much theoretical, so you can see that less than 25% actually are theoretical, and some of them are both. They combine good theory with good empirical data. I would actually assume that my expectation is this was actually much bigger. So the marriage, like the IJCCR wants, marriage between academia and practice would be happening. That might not be completely the case. Regarding the temporal analysis, most of the case studies are retrospective, so not so many of them are, for example, prospective, based on scenarios or modeling, etc. So I'll show you that. So most of them are actually retrospective empirical case studies. It's interesting to see also that there's quite a lot of single case studies. And that, in the beginning, it can be very interesting. Of course, after a while, single case studies, which most of the times are not comparable, they come into a point which it becomes not so much interesting for the evolution of the scientific field. Some of them have like several case studies, but it's very hard to specify how many case studies. So this is like this. But when we come to the typology of case studies, and I used the Blanc 2011 generations typology, you can just focus on the blue graph. You can see there's a lot of local currencies, LETs and time banks. There's like 2 papers on the Bitcoin, a few papers on Irisham Gower, of course, and other regional currencies. But this is kind of the outlook. So basically what we have, if we take the average, will be the kind of local currency, single case study, retrospective, empirical, with almost no theory. If you could just like point out one, the probability of getting something like this is pretty high. Now, regarding impact assessment, what do you think? A lot of case studies have impact assessment or no impact assessment. Gut feeling is? No. Well, I was a little bit open as what I consider impact assessment. We took into consideration like social network analysis, social audits, a number of different things. And based on a little bit of a wider approach and a little bit of a flexible approach, what impact assessment actually means, we came to something like this. So almost 2/3 no impact assessment whatsoever. A third, yes, actually is. Although it's like mostly time banks who actually do impact assessment. And it's most of the times a partial impact assessment. So if we were really strict on, long-term impact assessment with really a lot of variables, etc., I would say almost nobody, 1 or 2 articles actually have done it. And although there is, should we compete with them and just go like to the screen? I think it's going to be good. Yeah! Okay. So yeah, the data here should be more exciting, so you will also be like just doing those kind of things. But just data. What can I do? I cannot compete with that. Probably that. That's the case. Okay. It's interesting. Like there's a lot of economists publishing, but when you look at it, you see that only 6% of the articles actually use some kind of economic or econometric kind of a modeling to examples. But then again, it's a kind of a broad concept of what actually is monetary modeling or what is econometric data. So I would say a lot of economists, but in terms of modeling, not really so much. We can discuss why the economists are not using their own models and methods and tools. That's a whole other issue. Regarding the conclusions, I will try to weave a narrative through some of the conclusions. So I'm going to mention Rolf Schroeder, who is here. And one of the things that you can take out of a lot of papers, some of them in a more blunt way. So for example, Molly Scott, she says, perhaps the most telling criticism is that it's not a serious economic endeavor at all, but rather a game for middle-class activists who have other sources of livelihood. Very strong statement. But what you see in a lot of conclusion is kind of this humble perspective regarding these experiments and these projects and these initiatives, which for me, what they tell me is something like this. It's kind of complementary currencies are really nice, are really fun, but they are not the panacea of solutions that will solve the problems of the capitalist society. They will not solve the problems of the world. So there's a kind of a humble perspective which kind of deconstructs this naive, sometimes, idea of community currencies will solve the world. When you look at the conclusions of everybody says, yes, but it's harder than people think about it. So one of the conclusions I get is like, yes, but it's not the universal panacea for everything. Another issue of the conclusion is like, there's a lot of experimentation with the appropriate design. So we have a lot of assumptions. Some of them are kind of ideological. So for example, demurrage increases velocity of circulation. Yeah, everybody believes that. But then when you go into the concrete data and experiments, some author says, no, it's not true. That's actually not the most important variable. Other variables. Or even when you say actually community currencies only thrive or thrive mostly during economic crisis. And actually other authors prove with a lot of data that says, nah, actually that's not true. Or like how does the design actually influences the acceptance, the velocity, the success? My perspective is actually nobody knows. It's really everybody's kind of in the dark, trying and experimenting different design elements, but it's, I don't know, it's really, yeah, there's a lot of inconsistency in the data, etc. Another kind of conclusion that I would like to bring here is that there's a lot of authors which are trying to mediate or to try to establish this conversation between the marginal systems and the wider, bigger systems, the fiscal systems or legal systems. And this conversation, it's a very interesting conversation. So there's a lot of authors trying to conclude and not all the time knowing exactly what this relationship between alternative currencies and central banks, between alternative currencies and fiscal entities, how this will work out. So this relationship with the bigger systems, sometimes with the dark force, it's a kind of a relationship that more recently, more authors are coming into and stepping into this kind of conversation. And this actually leads me to a point which I see the tension sometimes between the idea of complementary currencies completely be treated as complementary and non-competitive with the dominant, and some other authors, a little bit more kind of stronger, saying, no, they have to assume the alternative, not the complementarity, and they have to be with an agenda to reprogram money, redefine its symbolism, a little bit of a pushing a little bit more the comfort zone and pushing a little bit more the limits. So there's this tension between these two visions and these two ideas, and what exactly should the complementary currencies serve for. In terms of so this is kind of the conclusion, some of the things that I kind of got. It's interesting, and you, like those who are academics in the room probably know, the end of any research paper is we need more research. So my expectation was like, yeah, so there's going to be a lot of papers saying we need more research, because also it's a growing new field. What you find out, actually, it's not quite the case. So what I found out was 60% of the publications did not explicitly call for more empirical tests, experiments, etc. And almost half of them actually did not explicitly, or even sometimes implicitly, ask for more or deeper research, which is just interesting side note. But when we go into the research gaps, I try to cluster them into these four. So basically, if we take the 78 articles, yes, I'm good. And you try to bring what are the research gaps people I identify, I would put here. One of them is the need for longer, better, more consistent, more coherent, more structured impact assessment methodologies and actually trials, which can also be compared. Because a lot of people say, yeah, this complementary currency is working, having this impact, but we really don't know how or how much, etc. So there's a lot of authors calling for that. Another one is actually the issue of appropriate design. So what is the appropriate design for the appropriate scale? So this is kind of more of a meta, but there's a lot of considerations about how different design elements affect the currency success. So there's a lot of things into appropriate design. Other thing is really more cross-sectorial, cross-transdisciplinary, multi-scale the data. So like economists working more with sociologists and psychologists and like working together. There's a very clear need for this. And the other one is diving more into the idea of sustainable governance, knowing that the way that we take the decisions and the way we manage the currencies is sometimes as important as the design of the currency itself. So there's a lot of this, and also connected with the issue of the acceptance of the currencies. And to these four, which I tried to cluster, I would add a fifth one, which I've called niche innovations, which is not completely there, but implicitly in comments and remarks, I think it's something that can be justified. One of them is the need to go away from the usual suspects, you know, Shem-Gao, etc., and go into other kind of designs, other kind of currencies, like, for example, energy-backed or energy-based currencies, and, you know, expand the field of knowledge. And another one is everybody speaks about community currencies, but the question is anybody actually researching community currencies as in intentional communities or eco-villages, for example? And actually, no. So there's a research gap there. Well, one that is actually being, and I think this conference taps completely into this, is like the municipality-based currencies, which there's a lack, but is, I think here we've managed to get there. And there's definitely a research gap regarding legal and fiscal compliance innovations, etc. I would add this fifth research gap. I think there's a lot of niche innovations that are missing. And just to finish, in the end of my article, I tried to bring a kind of let's work together, truly together, to try to achieve this research gap and establish a research agenda for IJCCR for the future. And of course, it's really hard. You know, like you cannot impose a research agenda. Every researcher should do whatever they want. So instead of bringing a research agenda, last night I was like, you know, I could not sleep, and I got this image. So I'm going to be a little bit more poetic. Also try to include the masculine and the feminine. So actually, instead of putting a research agenda, let me try and put out a vision, perhaps for the future of this field and for the future of the journal. And for me, this was the symbol that came to me, Yin and Yang, everybody knows this. And basically, the invitation is a kind of it's the invitation for all of us, practitioners and researchers, for a conscious integration of the masculine and the feminine, the north and the south, the practice and the theory, the complexity and the simplicity, the marginal and the mainstream, structure with chaos, stability with emergency, and past with future. Like this idea of a very conscious integration of all of these, having known that there's a lot of imbalances of power, of, you know, there's a lot of invisible structures actually that also binds us to this kind of balances. So this could be a vision. I call it a poetic vision. Maybe it's not so poetic, but anyhow, a poetic vision of what could be a research agenda for all of us. Yeah. So this is basically in a very short time. My paper has much more data that you can just dive into. And actually, after it's published, I'm going to put all the database online for you guys to continue the research and do whatever you want with that. And if anybody would like to co-author more papers working on this, please let me know. Thank you so much. Questions? I think this is all mine.
Okay.
So.
First of all, thank you very, very much for presenting normally boring information in such an interesting way, really. You talked about the gap in the research gap in energy currency. I would be very interested in it. Maybe we can talk after the presentation about it. There were two questions. I forgot them. I don't care.
First of all, thank you. I like your presentation. When you said that you cannot, say to researchers what research they should do, but you can also help them in a certain way. For example, creating kind of special issues. You can call for specific topics to be. I think you should, at certain way, I don't know exactly, to suggest that things that should be done. So, what kind of calls for papers should be organized in a certain way to fill those gaps that you have identified? That's just a suggestion, but I think it would be very interesting to promote the new researches on the topics that you think that you're not doing very well.
I agree.
Thank you. I also sort of have more of a comment, and because, well, for me, this is the first conference I'm attending, and I am currently doing a research on the psychological aspect of community currency, but I have noticed that there is almost nothing existing in relation to this, which I think it's quite a problem, because if you want to influence behavior, or if you want people to act in a particular way, because you hear a lot of people saying, well, you have a community currency, it's established for a period of time, but then for certain reasons it's died. And I thought, well, it is important for you to understand the behavior of the participant, which is, in my opinion, a bit lacking. So I think it would be interesting if there was more of this and people actually focused on that.
Completely to that point, there's actually only one paper which actually that addresses that point, which is actually called Psychological Factors of I think it's from 2016 even. So it's a very 2016 Carmen Smith. So sorry, I will give you the paper later on. Yeah, but yeah, it's true. So there's a lot, like there's a big lack into research going to the psychological factors of acceptance of use that are absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, any more questions or comments? Please.
Hello, Mary Fee from Let's Link UK. The last research that I know was done nationally was about 20 years ago. The person who founded Let's Link UK, she did research. We haven't done any formal research since then. I've been very much part-time, just taking care of things. Students often approach us, or often approach groups wanting to do research. They never ever ask what research is needed. They come along with inappropriate expectations. They take up the time of members. They never ever offer to help run the scheme. They never ever report back. And one of the main people who researched a long time ago has become a specialist in how to counter the black economy to advise governments. So somebody needs to do some good PR with me and find out what research we think needs doing and do something useful.
No.
I was not invited to this conference. I was not invited to this conference. Okay. I just found out about it because I happened to look and see is there a conference.
Well, thanks a lot for your... I was very happy to hear a lot of things in your presentation. First of all, not many come from finance. I do. Not much do future prospective simulations, is my favorite thing. 6% use econometric modeling, well, that's also my expertise. But I didn't see it in the research gaps. So my question is to you also, what is needed in this area? And also with the points, the relationship with a bigger system, because I have still a lot of work with the big financial institutions, and I think it's important also to have this relationship. What do you guys think?
Yeah. So welcome and great to have you here. It's very good. I actually So in my paper, I actually mentioned that, although I'm not completely sure if the econometric models and the modeling that we have nowadays with assumptions and how they work, if actually they are the appropriate tools to look into complementary currencies. So more modeling, etc. Yes, I actually use it in my thesis, but it's not very clear. You know what I mean? So I think there's much more to do in that respect. And regarding the conversation with the bigger system, I think it's like this tension. You have like stronger visions sometimes pulling. Like no, we should just do our own things, and like Buckminster Fuller used to say, and make the old one obsolete. For example, that people just we do our thing. Some people say no, we have to communicate. We have to work with banks. We have to whatever. And this tension is there. What to do with it? I'm not sure, but I know where is tension, there is energy, there is focus, so there is room to do a lot of things. So if you are into that, we can speak about it later. I have some ideas. Yeah.
Okay, I take, yes, that's two. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Or one.
If you actually want, the preliminary version of the paper as well as the presentation is on ResearchGate, on my thesis. You can see there, reconciling managed sustainability, co-designing alternatives. So if you want to go there and comment, suggest, whatever, please do.
Hello. I just have like maybe one question. Like when we miss like of course comparative studies in this field, but how can we do comparative studies when we are talking about very different systems? So this is one of my questions. And maybe just a remark, it's maybe we should not build our research in what we want to know, but what the people involved in this field wants to know. Maybe use more participatory research. I don't know, just.
Can you take two questions or two questions and answer directly? Okay. Yeah, I remembered my question. You mentioned the tax before, and that taxation is often a problem with the community currencies or the legal aspect. And that's why I wondered. I'm sorry, I didn't know about this magazine before, so I don't know the contents. But maybe something is wrong with our taxation system. Are there articles that tackle this question?
So regarding the first topic, again, in the paper, when I look into the methods, what I see, for example, is on the methods used, most of them go to secondary data. And not so many go into, and actually only 2 or 3 actually go into participatory action research, which I believe, well, at least my expectation, because of this marriage between activism and academia, there should be much more participatory action and research. So like research should be there in the field, working with the practitioners, doing, and learning and studying while doing and redesigning. So there I'm 100% with you, and I make that claim in the thing. But the thing is, it didn't appear as a research gap identified by the authors. You know what I mean? So I was just trying to cluster what the authors themselves thought as a research gap. Then I make my own, which I make that claim, for example, but that's my own perspective on that. You know what I mean? So here I just presented what the authors themselves kind of pursued. And your first question was? Oh yeah, the comparative, yeah. Comparative and, yeah, there's a lot of requests among the practitioners and academic for more comparative analysis and data, etc. How will that work? It's a question mark. I don't know. And there is not, there's some attempts. For example, there's this impact assessment matrix, for example, that's proposed in 2015 by Bindwald and Plus. But I'm not sure how will that work, if people would use it or not. So I think that is really a matter of establishing more dialogue between different researchers and practitioners to see how can they actually work together to establish some points. But it's a very hard question to answer at the moment. But there's some 2 or 3 papers working on that. I can just recommend you those. And to finish, yes, question was about the text, etc. Yes, there is not so many, maybe 4 or 5 papers who try to approach this issue of taxation, namely regarding the issue of time banks. And there's like one of local currencies or 2, but it's really exploring. So there's not so much kind of a systematization of what could be the legal frameworks in which you could, no, that's uncharted territory for the most of it, I would say. Yeah. Well, thank you very much.